Dr. Wim Lavin here to answer the question, when does MeToo succeed and when does MeToo fail? So this is going to be a supplement. You'll be watching 3 clips, and I don't want to repeat what's there so much as provide framework from our peace studies and conflict resolution that applies directly to an analysis of the hashtag MeToo phenomena of naming the offense, which is distinct from, and I'll talk more about it, the shaming of the offense. And so what Me Too has done is it has engaged with the epidemic of sexual violence in the U.S. And worldwide, but it's been specifically a North American, United States centered phenomena. And I want to give the caveat that there is 2 different versions of Me Too. The one we're really focusing on is the hashtag movement, but the Me Too that preceded is also worth reflection on. So a big part of my analysis here comes from my research for my dissertation on forgiveness. I didn't ask questions about Me Too. I also didn't ask questions about Black Lives Matter. But what I did was I applied my findings about attitudes and behaviors and looked at how that helped to explain the successes and failures within those movements. So a big part of what I'm describing here isn't just an opinion. It's rested in my findings on what different demographic groups reported in terms of their needs and identified wants in terms of healing and forgiveness. And I think it relates directly to some of the claims that I'm going to make. So the conflict of sorts is that survival needs, basic human needs for safety and security, aren't being met in the individuals who are being attacked and intimidated and have coercive threats of all sorts of varieties used against them. Right? That's the direct experience of violence. Do this or else. Those threats are very real, and it works the same when it's do this or else, right? With the threat of physical violence, as it does when do this or else you won't work for me, right? So you have Hollywood directors and so forth who are notorious for abusing their power in terms of being able to take advantage of aspiring actresses and so forth, right? But the broader part of the epidemic is the part in which women, whether or not they've been targeted or are currently being targeted, live under like this banner of sexism and rape culture in America. And so Alyssa Milano really catapults this into the spotlight when she encourages via Twitter. If every woman who's ever been assaulted posted Me Too, hashtag Me Too, then men would see just how rampant this epidemic is and how many of the women that they value and treasure and love are being victimized. And women answer the call in staggeringly large numbers with a rate that's just, I mean, so to say it was viral almost seems like a bad pun. It was just so many women came forward so quickly that. But so the question then is, did that work? Did raising awareness, which is something that we talk about, I preach the gospel of grassroots movements, and and education as an answer for conflict. Did it work? Did men finding out that lots of women have been victimized and women that they care about change anything? And so here's where the analysis gets really tricky. Right? We talk about conflict as an opportunity, and conflict can be a good thing because conflict can catalyze positive change. So the Alyssa Milano version of this model is to say, once people are made aware of just how big of a problem this is, then they'll start doing more to address it and to curb it. And so the success is that there is a measurable demonstration that did happen. That there's a lot of different ways in which people are insulated from the trauma, even within their own families, that they just don't realize. And there are lots of psychological mechanisms that explain why those who have been traumatized don't want to become re-traumatized in telling stories, or that those who've been victimized have felt like they tried to share their stories and they weren't listened to or believed. And there's a stigma, right? There's a general stigma, right? You don't want to look like the weaker person who's been victimized. So there are reasons why people hold back. And it's not just about trust. And so the public is made more aware of. The failure, in some ways, is that not all women experience the crimes that are alleged by the MeToo movement in the same ways. So white women are it's in the evidence, right? White women are more likely to have their claims of assault believed than black women, for example. And so the antagonisms, right, within our broader culture of criminality and traumatization of communities, in some ways were exaggerated. So the big part is that the emergence of a movement focused on naming a problem in society and trying to find services to offer help and healing to victims. Beautiful. And it works great. Lots of women were able to identify networks that provided them the support that they needed to start talking about what had happened to them, start figuring out how to process it in terms of the justice system, if that was something that they wanted to do. Start identifying and accessing the resources that were necessary. At the time that this really took off, I was living in the state of Georgia. I had modest involvement with an organization there called the Ahimsa House. And what the Ahimsa House did, it borrows from Sanskrit. Ahimsa is harm, and so ahimsa is without harm. But what the Ahimsa House looks at is a specific feature of domestic violence, which is that individuals who harm their partners are also significantly more likely to harm pets. And it looks at this feature of a group of women who are victimized, who are pet owners, and figures out, right, through interviews and questions, that a lot of these, and it's typically women, especially for this demographic, but that these women are significantly less likely to leave their partners out of fear that the person who's been abusing them will harm their pets. And that this antagonism grows when compounded with the fact that there are very few shelters for people victimized by domestic violence, who are going to be able to bring their pets with them, right? So for the woman to flee, she has to leave a pet with somebody who is willing potentially to use that pet to do harm, or someone who has said, if you ever try to leave me, like, I'm going to, right? And they make those threats. So shelters aren't in a position to take in the pets. Frequently, it's a challenge also for getting apartments and stuff. So what the Ahimsa House does is it finds volunteers who will do one of two things: transport animals to a foster family, or to find the people who will become the fosters, somebody who's willing to take care of the pet, make sure it's safe, so that a victim can then find safety, with the plan to find safety, and then once they're able to have pets again, to be able to get their pet back. So the person who drives, and I've been on a few of these rides, and it's truly remarkable, but it's like basically codename protected. Pet is picked up without its real name, transferred, and then given another new name. And I would ask, why does the pet have to have a different name? Well, if the abuser hears somebody yelling out a pet's name and they're wanting to get back at someone, then that's another way, they would be able to key in, but don't want to have any revealing information. Somebody might identify the pet and say, like, hey, where's so-and-so, right? The pet's owner. And that could be problematic. Anyway, so just one minor detail in the violence against women is the part where it's intimate partner violence, which is separate from the MeToo movement. But again, this is a broader culture of victimization that targets women. There are different ways that intimate partner violence impacts people of all persuasions, right? It could be man on man, it could be man on woman, it could be woman on woman. And rarely, as the numbers turn out, woman on man. But in any case, the support services, sometimes the problem is that people don't know how to get to where they need to. And there are a lot of different reasons why it might be challenging for someone who needs that help to be able to make that phone call. And so putting a spotlight on it, putting the information out there, making it more widely accessible, helps to get people to the resources they need. So education, grassroots mobilization, lobbying for some policy change. We have seen a growing acceptance to enact legislation that can do more to curb some of these things. So where I can be more concrete about the failure, and I alluded to this earlier, is that the naming of the offense did great, right? Public awareness was increased, policy measures were enacted. There was a segment within the movement, and I don't want to say it was a smaller or large part. I really don't have the numbers on that. And I don't want to guess on it, but what I do know is that this didn't work as well. The naming worked, the shaming didn't. Significant numbers of victims essentially said of some version of, that's not what I got in this for. I didn't want to go public with it. I didn't want the perpetrator to have a chance to get back at me. I didn't want the perpetrator to find out that they'd gotten away with it. I didn't want to be reminded that people didn't believe me. None of that, right? They didn't want to have to go through the litigious process of proving that they didn't ask for it, or what they were wearing wasn't an invitation, or whatever it might have been. They wanted to be part of the collective to say, I deserve better, but they didn't want to get involved in the adversarial part of our judicial process. They weren't trying to seek revenge. Lots of people, this is stuff that has happened to them a long time ago. They've healed. They've found their way. They've moved on. And having to go through that part of the process wasn't something that motivated them. But there were calls for that. And the shaming part also had a kind of a different aspect on the public. Right? It's easy, I mean, in a very psychological way, when somebody has something bad happen to them, to show them sympathy, empathy, and support. To tell them, like, what can I do to make things better? But when the specific offense gets realized, then people's different kind of defense mechanisms kick in. And, right, like, we watched this happen with Donald Trump supporters standing up for him despite the dozens of women who have alleged his actions to be criminal. We've seen it with people about Bill Cosby. I mean, we just see it, right? There are specific people that and people defend them. And it's an interesting psychological, logical phenomena that in almost all other areas of crime, people tend to have this kind of acceptance that mistakes happen or even good people do bad things. But sex crimes are one of the areas where if the person is nice and charitable or has done these good things or accomplished so much, that is applied as a specific kind of defense against that person couldn't have done that because they're so good otherwise. It's not to say that character doesn't come up in criminal cases on a regular basis. I'm saying the application, the idea that a good person can't do this makes logical sense, except for that we don't apply it the same in other cases. So people became very, very defensive about their heroes and their icons, and so that caused different splits. That's not to say that I want to say that shaming perpetrators is something that we categorically shouldn't do. I just want to say that the numbers don't play out that served the movement very well. The shaming phase turned people off, where they were following along with the information sharing and seeing the rampant and epidemic nature of the problems. So we can think about that strategically in conflicts. Letting people know that there's a problem encourages their participation in solving it. Identification of wrongdoers that should be punished ends up getting people who might have otherwise been willing to collaborate, and puts them into a defensive posture where they might have been willing to help, but they're not willing to punish. And so we have to look at that analysis. MeToo did not help, I think, to increase prosecutions. Whether or not that was the goal, whether or not that should have been the goal. What increased prosecutions was increased pressure that got backlogs that were sometimes over a decade old processed. And then the evidence was then what was used to get serial sex offenders prosecuted and punished. So pressure on the right locations. The public pressure to do the shaming, not so much. And shaming actually isn't the same as punishment. So I'll see you guys in the next one. Hopefully that helps you to think about some of the analysis in the episodes you watch.